Hello, and welcome to Flute Topics, a program covering all things flutes. I'm Helen of Helen's Willow Wind, and I'm here today with Joanne Lazzarro. Hello, Joanne, how are you?
Good. Happy to be here.
Me too. We've been talking about this for a long time since we first connected. And this is a periodic program, and we're finally here, and I think that's wonderful. Um, and I know what attracted me to you to start with is I saw this picture of you standing on a rock in cutoffs with this big, long drone of a flute that was playing this way. And I was new to the flutes
Oh
or
yeah.
newish, and I'd never seen one. And I thought, that's cool. But the next picture I caught of you was somehow you were in this elegant green evening dress and you were in Lincoln Center. And then I see you recently and you're rappelling in Hawaii. And then I find out you did a bicycle ride from California to Boston, which I
Yes,
didn't
Riviera
know at the
Beach.
time. And I've just loved your energy and your drive and the fact that whatever you want to do, you really dive in 100% and you have this wonderful energy. And so here we are, and we're going to discuss all things Joanne.
Okay. And probably a lot of things flute.
Yes, yes. But when I think of Joanne Lazzaro, I think flute. And I know you have other interests. We've chatted about that. But if you could start us off with how you started with the flute, because I think your story is very interesting and unique, as is everyone's, but I found yours fun.
It was pretty random. I didn't grow up in a musical family. And one day I was being babysat in an old inn in upstate New York, and the owner's wife was babysitting me, and my mom was working downstairs at the inn. And so Rosalou had to like keep me occupied for a little while they were getting set up for dinner. And so she took me all the way up to the attic. And you have to realize this is a old stone inn that was built in the 1600s, and it was haunted, haunted as anything. I didn't know, I didn't care, I was a kid. But she takes me up to the haunted attic, and she gets out her band flute, her old band flute, and she puts it together, and she shows me how to hold it up, and I do. And she shows me how to blow into it, and I do, and I make a sound. And then she shows me how to play notes. She's like, hold it like this, put your hand down, that's a B. She says, like, blow, and I'm go, ba. She says, put your other finger down, that's an A. And I go, ba. Put the other finger down, that's a G, ba. And I thought, why do musical notes spell bag? And then you go G-A-B, it's gab. I had no idea why I was going bag, gab, because it was just like letters. The letters, they immediately spelled words to me. And I was there for like, and she went downstairs, and I was there for like an hour and a half going, B-A-G-G-A-B, B-A-G-G-A-B. And, I that was my start. And fast forward, a few months later in my elementary school, where we all went and had that musical aptitude test, I get called down to the principal's office, and there's a very nice man, the band director, with a big table and posters of all the instruments spread out. And we were supposed to walk around the table and point to the instrument we wanted to play. Because, little, like, we didn't know nothing about musical instruments. So I'm walking around the table, and I pause momentarily at this shiny brass conical thing that looked like a snail. And I thought that looked really cool. But then I walked further around the table and I saw the flute, and I'm like, flute, flute. That's what I want to play. The band director looks at me and he points at some other like black licorice stick thing, which was probably a clarinet or an oboe, and says, "What about this?" I'm like, "No, flute, flute." And that's how I picked the flute.
That's amazing.
It was literally the only musical instrument I'd ever touched in my life, the only one that I recognized or knew the name of. So
Well,
that's how.
Joanne, I've heard you play. We've all heard, most everybody has heard you play. I want to say all. Um, And thank God for that attic.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And the fact that you actually sat there and get absorbed by it. You didn't get bored.
No, no, I was just like completely entranced. I mean, I have never, literally never touched a musical instrument in my life. And here I was, and I had this real, it was beautiful, and it made sounds, and, it was a lot of work, but I got the hang of it. And, I was just really captivated by it. And when it didn't occur to me that I would ever actually get the chance to play it again. This was just like, your babysitter gives you a game and then you never see them or the game again. So I was really happy when I got to see the flute again. And when we get into those, group lessons with all the other little fourth grade beginners, everyone else is like, holding their flute upside down. And I'm like, B-A-G, G-A-B, B-A-G. And I was like, months ahead of them.
And I bet at that point, the music instructor, the teacher that had tried to get you to pick up that black licorice thing, was pleased by your choice.
He was pleased because I guess one of the things that I had naturally, and it could be that I just because I paid attention and did what I was told, but I naturally got a good sound out of the flute from the very beginning.
Wow.
And my band director was good at helping me to refine it and get better in the different octaves and everything. um and I always wondered why other kids had so much trouble getting a good sound out of the flute. So as I got older and I got my music education degree, I made it a real point to understand all the different sounds that you can make on a flute. And as I started listening to Irish flute and shakuhachi and Hindustani bansuri, and realized that the concept of flute sound varies a lot according to culture. And some of those flute sounds are considered like mistakes in the classical world, but once you hear that sound, whether the person's making it intentionally or accidentally, then you know what they're doing. If you hear, a tight, buzzy, reedy sound like Irish flute, they're biting down on their embouchure. If you hear like a very airy, sharp, almost no sound quality, then they're too far rolled out, and missing the striking edge, which is how a bansuri is supposed to sound, like the breath of God.
Mhm.
Um, so jazz players always have this kind of huffy, breathy sound. That's because they've just come off of playing saxophone for 20 minutes and they can't refocus the center of their embouchure, and that gives them that um, breathy spread sound. So even flute players who know how to play flute, clarinet, saxophone, and they know how to focus down the flute, if they're playing jazz, they open up their embouchure to sound like a tired sax player, and that gives them that breathy quality, which is considered now characteristic of jazz. It's really the person's chops are too tired from biting down on a reed and they can't focus. But that's the sound. And when you hear that sound, you know exactly what the person's doing with their face.
Mhm.
So as I start to study this, then it helped me a lot with students because no matter what kind of sound they were getting, rather than tell them, oh, you're doing it wrong, I say, well, this sound, which is characteristic of Irish flute or jazz or bansuri or whatever other culture, this is the sound you get if your embouchure is like this and your breath support is like that and your angle's like this or your angle's like that. I said, that's a sound. If that's not the sound you want to get, then here are the things that you
You
can
can do.
change to get a different sound. So I've taken it out of the right and wrong to these are sound qualities,
Mhm.
and they're desirable in some styles of music and not desirable in other styles of music. You get to pick your sound. What I want students to know is, how do they make the sound that they want,
Mhm.
on demand.
Mhm.
So it really transformed my teaching from right sound, wrong sound to, these are all the sounds that come out of a flute. These are the ways that you make them.
Mhm.
As a player, make your choice.
Mhm. Well, there's a going backwards a little bit, and I know you have the training, you've got your bachelor's and your master's. But before that, one of the other wonderful things that happened to you early on was the attic, which I just think that's the neatest thing I've ever heard. But you had families and friends and relatives and people who started realizing your interest. And as they traveled and went around, they were so supportive and wonderful and brought you back every kind of flute there was that they found of all different materials, styles. And you actually explored those and you were finding those sounds on your own just as a person listening versus the educational part. You had that coming into your college, so both coming into your fourth grade you had something to offer, and then this other experience I can only imagine would help you develop your ear and sense of sound and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, people would bring me like these little bamboo flutes and wooden flutes and ceramic flutes, and some of them are just like souvenirs,
Mhm.
and wall hangers, but some of them were actual flutes. And I was just, a gaga about every kind of, bamboo or wooden flute. I'm like, this is a flute, so I would start playing them. And actually, I have a flute that I bought at a art fair, like when I was in high school, and I don't remember who made it, or anything. Beautiful ceramic flute, beautifully tuned. I've actually played that in concerts. In a band concert once, they had like this little tune, and I'm like, oh, that should have been played on like a Chinese flute. And I got out that little ceramic flute, and it was like right in tune. And I played that little tune on it, and everyone was like, wow, you had the flute that, the composer must have been thinking about when they wrote this line. So I really like, if I have a chance to bring in an authentic world flute, even in a non-world flute setting, if
Mhm.
I detect that the composer heard some sort of world flute and I have one, I have no qualms about telling the directors, like, that was on a particular kind of flute. I have one of them.
Mhm.
Why don't I play it that way, and then it will sound authentic.
Mhm. Mhm. And do you think you picked that flute because your ear understood it at that time, or was it a luck of the draw and then later on there it was and it was perfect for that piece?
At the time I found it, it was luck, because I'm there, in the middle of a craft fair. It
Mhm.
looked nice, it played nice. Other than that, I didn't have any, ulterior motives
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm.
Now, when I go out finding world flutes, I have two different things I'm looking for. So I'm looking for something that's, if it's supposed to be played in ensembles, then I look for something that seems to be, well made and reasonably in tune. The other thing I'm looking for are flutes that are in non-European scale orientations. So the notes don't line up with any of the notes on the piano, or they line up with some of the notes, but not all of them. And I've started to really appreciate the subtleties of the non-European ways of organizing sound. And flutes are often made to follow that culture's concept of sound, which is
Oh.
predates the European um, piano and concept of the mathematical division of strings, which gives you specific numbers, which give you specific pitches.
Mhm.
European concept of pitches was based on math. In other cultures, it's based on the specific sound and how much they like that sound.
Mm-hmm. And so, with all that, how did you get to the Native American flute?
You know, every time I went somewhere, I'd be looking for flutes. So I was on a cross country camping trip, and I was in Boulder, Colorado, and there's a little like native arts and crafts store in some mall in the middle of Boulder. And I went in, and up on the wall was a row of flutes by Chris Tycoon. And I looked up there, and there was nobody in the store. Um, and I asked the cashier, I said, "Are those flutes up on the wall?" And she's like, "Yes." I said, "Can you take one down and let me try?" And she's like, "Sure." So she takes it down. You know, I can figure out which end of a flute to blow into. You know, it's only got 5 holes. I start playing it, and I'm like, well, this is cool. It has like a little card attached to it that says what the 5 notes are. And I'm like, okay, you know, I can play this. And I thought it sounded great, you know, so I bought it and took it with me. And that was my campfire flute. And here's the point where, you know, I was so heavily trained classically. I really didn't know how to improvise. I always felt at a loss for improvising. Um, and so I had this instrument and nothing but a little finger chart and no music to read for it and time to kill. So I could play notes on it, but I was really self-conscious. So we were at this campground, um, and I didn't want anyone to hear me. So I hiked up the ridge up onto a hill, and I figured I'll be far away from everyone and I'll start playing. So I hike up to this hill and I'm playing along, you know, having fun because nobody can hear me and I don't know what I'm doing. And as I'm playing along up the trail, I hear footsteps coming up the trail. And so eventually people come into view and they're like, "Oh, here's the flute player." They said, "We could hear you all the way down in the campground. The sound's going through the entire valley." So, and they liked it. So I thought, okay, whatever I'm doing, you know, it must not sound that bad. And after that, I would just do my improvising by the campfire and I wouldn't try to get far away
Mm-hmm.
from everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that first flute taught me its first song because, you know, they do that, right? Especially with Native American flutes, they teach you their first song. And I would always play this song. I called it Evening Star Song. And I always played it at sunset when the evening star would show up. And it was like an end of the day, you know, saying goodbye to the sun and um, requesting to have another day, you know, to come back tomorrow. And, you know, it was a really simple song, and I didn't really think a lot of it. It was just like the first song that I learned all on my own on a flute. And I put that on my first album. And what I discovered just like last year was that on Pandora, people were using it as a lullaby. And they were playing it because their kids would fall asleep by the end of the song. And so that's like my number one streaming song on Pandora, and people are using it to put their kids to sleep. And
Wow.
I had no idea, you know, I had no idea. Um, so, you know, you just you never know, you know, what you're going to learn from a flute, where it's going to take you, what it's going to draw out of you, how that will reach other people. You know, not every flute has that effect, but I have certain flutes where they like draw something out of the universe every time I pick them up, you know. That's been sort of the most amazing part, is which flutes seem to have like a line into the universe.
And having that connection and feeling that in trusting it, in exploring it the way you do, and the way you did as a kid, all the way along, even though you were getting all this education, which is good too, but you kept that curiosity going, has done you has stood the test of time. What other things like that would you say have been the aha moments for you, or the things that you hold true and pass on to people? And I don't mean the note or this song, but the hearing it, the flute and what it has to say.
I think that, when it comes to flutes in particular, and it doesn't matter whether it's a classical flute or a bamboo flute, um, the flute really becomes an extension of your voice. And if you're not a great singer, it's almost a replacement of your voice. The flute plays things that you would sing if you could, but since you can't sing that well, you can play it on the flute. It really expands your voice to heights and depths and levels of beauty, which maybe you were not blessed with. And because it reflects your voice, it reflects all of your emotions, all of the inflections that would normally be in your voice. And you can, once you become sensitive to that and understand that the flute is your voice, even if you have a terrible singing voice, the flute is so much better and so much more capable of expression, that when you go to play, there's always this moment between when you pick up your flute and when the first note comes out. There's always this moment where, if I'm improvising, for example, I ask myself, what do I want to say? I ask that question. And then the notes that come out of my flute say it. That's the answer. And if I'm playing like a known tune, a tune that other people might recognize, then in that moment, right before I start to play, I take all the notes of that tune and I roll them up backwards and I put them into the first note. I put the entire story into the first note. And then I unroll the story with the first note. So I always have that moment where either I am recounting a story or I am doing a free association, an answer to a question that I have just asked myself. So there's that element of storytelling. And it's what's really kind of interesting is that my boyfriend is a singer, and we have this discussion, we have these musical discussions. And when I talk about telling a story with an instrument, then I ask him, how does he approach? And he says, well, I'm never telling a story. I am generating a feeling. Says it doesn't matter what the words are. I'm generating a feeling. And so I play an instrument that has no words. So I'm telling a story without words, which eventually people will have different feelings about. So we both have this very different way of approaching what we do as musicians. And I thought it was interesting that always goes after feelings, and I always go after storytelling. Um, and yet, listeners are impacted, authentically when they listen to either one of us, but we just have completely different attitudes going in about what we think the audience is going to experience. So, I mean,
I
there's
have a
really a
question
lot
about
of,
that. I mean,
sure,
your
sure.
conversations must be wonderful with because he's of a certain ilk in his playing too. You've
Right,
sent me some
right.
things. He's wonderful. So, have you two played together? And since you go for the words and you're answering something, and he's going more for the emotion, have you played sort of together? And how does that work out?
We have not played together yet. Um, Actually, I recorded some stuff on one of his songs because he needed like piccolo, he needed fife
Hmm.
on a song. So I've actually laid in tracks over his songs, but we have not performed live together. And it's um it's like one of these things because he does blues and I don't really feel like I'm at the caliber of all the other people that he plays with in terms of really being able, to get around um effectively um in the blues and and when you're playing with some of these people who are like famous and legendary, I feel self-conscious once again about being a person who does not have, I don't know, the street cred or the experience, to really go in there and have, the cats in the back going. They they can be very critical. They can be very critical. It's like you have it or you don't. You're in these, hole in the wall places in South Central LA, and this is serious blues. This is not, what you see on YouTube.
Hmm.
So it's coming. I just have to like get comfortable with a couple of his tunes so that I feel like I can do a decent job and not look like, the clueless girlfriend who really can't get around in this genre
You
because
know, this is just surprising the heck out of me because here I said, and if I were to play with you,
Mhm,
I would feel not intimidated because of you, but I
mhm.
would have that feeling you have around the blues people, times 100 times, but um, because of where I'm at. And I look at you and I can't even imagine that you would have an ounce of insecurity about being with them. And when you listen to or anyone, okay? But when you listen to the blues, I mean, it always sounds like it's so easy and it's just coming out. It's a lot of work, the
It
blues.
is it is a lot of work, and there's a quality to the blues that has nothing to do with like how many notes you play or how few notes you play. It's kind of similar. I once went to a jazz master class and for classical flutists who play jazz. And the master class had three competition winners. And the person hosting the class was some famous jazz flutist. And I'm trying to remember who it was, and the name escapes me. But anyway, so famous jazz flutist was giving this master class for the three winners of a jazz flute competition. So the first winner, who is actually number three in the rankings, goes up and they got a live band playing. And the band starts playing, ba-doop, ba-doop, boop. And this guy, he just lets out a torrent of notes. He played every lick, every rip, for the entire duration of the song. He finishes up like, wow, I played a lot of notes. And she just looked at him and just started tearing apart everything he did. And I thought, played a lot of notes, and she hated like 99% of them. So I thought, this is not what I expected. Second person comes up who is number 2 in the ranking. So the band starts playing, ba-doop, ba-doop, boop. And she starts playing, and she's playing the tune, adding a few things in with it. She gets done with the song. The instructor has, here's the good things, here's the things you need to fix, worked with her for a while on the song. So I thought, okay, that's, more like what I expected. Okay, she did a better job with the tune and whatever you were supposed to do along with the tune. So then the third person goes up, who is the number 1 winner of the competition. And the band starts playing, ba-doop, doop, 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 ba-doop. And she's just there holding her flute, bopping along. And eventually she picks up her flute and goes, ba-deep. Band's playing along, ba-deep, ba-doop. Band's playing along, beat up. Band's playing along. And I'm thinking, she's hardly playing. Does she not know the tune? She's like spending most of the time like bopping her head, right? So she gets to the end of the tune. The instructor comes up and says, thank you. Finally, someone has shown us how to take a line. And I thought, huh? And that's when I really sat up and took notice. When you hear jazz or blues or all those related forms of music where you think a person is improvising or they're making it up or personalizing it or whatever, there's a certain element of what are you saying? Is it a word salad? Is it a story? Or is it like a haiku with the fewest number of words with the highest level of meaning? So, there's all these different ways of expressing yourself, and you can say a lot with very few notes. And that caused me to really sit up and think about improvising as a way of picking your favorite notes or the most meaningful notes or the most important notes and let time and space and sound of other people or whatever fill in between. That improvising is not about showing everybody every single note you can play on your flute as fast as you can play it. There's a place for that occasionally, but the more meaningful is how much impact are you putting into the notes that you play, not how many notes can you throw out there in as short a time as possible. So that really turned around my concept of improvising and thinking about the intentionality of it. So yeah, I was really, that was like one of the most memorable master classes I've ever sat in because it completely changed my outlook on improvisation.
Well, you just changed my outlook on improvisation. I mean, I've always heard of space, this, that, and the other, but see, I love blues, and I actually thought when I started playing flute,
Mhm.
well, that's another story. But I really love the blues, and I wanted to do blues on the flute. But you're right. But when you started doing the BB, I mean, you got to the point of it. I'm not. I'm rambling here because what you just fed me about improvisation and what you're actually saying,
Mhm.
and then say your boyfriend, he would probably do those same few notes, but he would be feeling like the girl bobbing her head. I mean,
Right, right.
that all just, what a beautiful picture you just painted.
Yeah, it's all about, understanding. In jazz, they call it taking a line. Um, it's not about impressing people with your virtuosity. It's about what's your musical idea and putting it out there so that people can follow it and hear your musical idea. It's like composing a haiku.
Hmm. Well, that is very interesting. And when you put all that together and you shake it all up, and out comes Joanne.
Hmm.
How would you describe your playing at this point versus that curious little girl in the attic?
You know, at this point, I am, it's hard to put it into words because if I was better at putting it into words, I'd be a writer rather than a musician.
Uh-huh.
But I'm trying to take the the synthesis of my experiences and my feelings and the physicality of the moment wherever I'm playing. And I'm trying to put that into a musical sound. Um, and it's the same whether I'm playing a known classical piece, which, you know, in the old days, my goal for learning classical pieces was to play them exactly the same every time because, you know, perfection and consistency is what you're being judged on. And I once heard a famous orchestral flutist said, well, you know, we play this material all the time. So now my goal is, and he was speaking for himself, my goal is, well, of course you play it differently every time. Otherwise, you'd be bored. So now I am looking how to make each musical experience unique, whether it's a known tune, and I want to make this particular instance of it unique, or if I'm improvising, I'm very much in the moment of what's around me, combined with how I'm feeling and my read on the listeners. And if there's no listeners, like if I'm, you know, out in nature, then it's more what I'm feeling and what vibes I get from the place, the plants, the animals, the weather. Um, so I'm always looking at trying to capture a moment that does not yet have the sound of a flute in it, and then put the sound of a flute in it as part of the moment. I don't know if any of that makes any sense.
Oh, oh,
Different.
you've got me wrapped around your finger. It makes all the sense in the world. It really does. Well, you know, we're running on, and I was wondering, do you have any gems and tips for people who, let's put them into three categories, because that's what we human beings do, okay? Somebody who's starting out, like you in the attic and just exploring the flute. Somebody who's part way through knows some, but they know enough to know they don't know enough.
Right, right.
I volunteer to put myself in that category. And then the person who is, I mean, I'm performing, there are a lot of people performing, but then the people sort of your level, if we want to call it that category, that has a reputation of that level and does the shows of your standing. What do you think would do each of those different categories the most good? Or is it the same thing, just you're somewhere else? Tough question, I think.
I think, yeah, it's a tough question. And part of it, you know, comes from the perspective of if you're talking to adults who are in this situation, which is different than if you're talking to 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds. They've got different things going on in their lives and different concerns. But let's say we're just dealing with grown-ups, with adults. So if you're learning something as an adult, it's really, really important to suspend the internal judgmental voice that says, you know, you are so terrible at this. Why are you even trying to learn this? You need to go back to that more childlike state where children are used to the fact that everything they're learning how to do is something they've never done before. So they go through this stage of clumsiness, of doing things incorrectly, of falling down, of saying the wrong things. And they are surrounded by people, coaches, teachers, whoever, who are encouraging them and correcting them and showing them how to do the thing. And the kids are very receptive and they understand that they're going to try to do something, it's not going to go well, and this person, this supportive person, is going to coach them and give them instructions. And if they do the thing that the coach or the teacher says, they will get better. And they don't think that they are a bad person because they are not instantly good at the thing. So for adults to go back to that state, and instead of being self-critical and self-judgmental in a non-helpful way, to understand that you're going to go through this phase and there's no shortcut for practice and experience. You have to go through this phase, and you'll get better. For the intermediate level, now we're getting into an area of, you can hear what sounds good that you like, and you can hear what you do and you're not happy with it, or you want to do something different, or you want to learn a new skill. At that point, it's more about clarity about where do you want to go with this? You know, is there a direction? Is there a kind of music that you want to play, or a style of music that you want to play? Or is there a musical skill that you want to develop and get better at, like, you know, learning to read music or learning to compose or understanding harmony? So decide what you want to focus on and then go through the steps of doing the work to expand your musical abilities or get technically better on the flute so that you can play more of what you want. And then when you get to the more advanced people, you know, you've been playing for a while, you can get around the flute really well. Then I ask a much more existential question. I ask them to ask themselves the same question that I ask myself every time I pick up the flute and I'm about to play in front of other people. I ask myself, what do you want to say? And make sure that you have asked yourself that question and that what comes out of your flute answers that question. And if you're not getting a satisfactory answer, then you can go back and look a little more technically, critically about, well, do I need to learn how to play in different keys? Do I need to learn how to play better in tune? Do I need to have a better sense of rhythm? Do I need to work on my ability to compose and refine songs, you know, so that I like them and can repeat them? Do I not need to get better at playing with tracks? Do I need to get better at playing without tracks? You know, so it's different. The end goal is always the same. It's like, be a better flute player that plays, you know, stuff that's pleasing to yourself first and then possibly pleasing to other people, but not always. I've heard people play flutes, you know, some traditional flutes, Japanese shakuhachi, where at the end of the piece I'm like, huh, um, that's it'll be like an ancient piece of music, and I'll be like, huh, that was an interesting experience. Not something that inspires me to go learn some of those ancient Japanese shakuhachi pieces, but you know, that's me. Other people love it. So what you want to hear, what you want to work on might be very specific to a small niche group of people and not the typical thing that you hear being played. You know, I'd encourage at any level to really try to play something that is different from all the other people playing Native American flute, especially. Play something that is different from anything you have ever heard anybody else playing. Keep asking yourself that question, keep challenging yourself to play something different. You know, it's easy to like go up and down the scale and do the scale song. Great. In classical music, that's what you do your first year of lessons. And then you move on. You move on from that. You move on. Um, so for Native American flute players especially, um, start playing things that are completely unlike anything else you've heard. And one of the things that you might have to do is don't listen to tracks. Um, don't work with tracks. Just start playing things. So you could do like nature sounds or, just drums or whatever. Um, but really step outside the box, because other than the box your flute was shipped in, once you take it out of the shipping box, you should never be inside the box. Get outside the box. You opened it up, it's out of the box, great. Um,
That
yeah.
right there is why I love you. I must say, that was a brilliant piece of work you just did. Oh my goodness.
So, um, that's what I would encourage people when I'm working on stuff for a new album, or even just getting ready for, any kind of performance. People ask me, well, who do you like and what recordings do you like and blah, blah. I, for the most part, make it a point, other than like occasionally, just to familiarize myself with a particular performer and their style. Um, I don't spend any time listening to other people play Native American flute. Especially when I'm working on Native American flute, because I am trying to create things that are very different. On the flip side, when I'm learning Irish flute and Irish whistle, there's like a long tradition of stylistic things that you can only learn from listening. So for that kind of music, I'll spend a lot more time listening so I can pick up stylistic things. And these are like traditional tunes. So there's a history and a tradition and a way of playing the tunes that can only be absorbed by listening, because a lot of the stylistic things are not written down. Same thing with shakuhachi. A lot of stuff is not written down. You have to listen to either recordings or people playing live to get the essence of the feeling, especially if you're trying to learn some other known tune. So with Native American flute, because there's not really a repertoire of traditional tunes that one needs to study or emulate, because that's just not how the instrument developed. It didn't develop with a codified, number of songs that were supposed to be played a certain way. Um, and certainly nothing monolithic that covers all of the North American tribes. It's a very personal expression, and um, I always try to find my own personal expression with that flute and refrain from copying anybody else's personal expression. So that's why I don't listen to a lot of Native American flute, but I do listen to traditional music from other cultures that have a long tradition of tunes and styles that one can only absorb by listening.
I think that's why I like the Native American flute. Is I don't have a music background. I took violin for a while, and I still, at this point, I'm in my 60s. I would love to learn to play the violin again, and I just might. But I'm busy doing what I'm doing. Um, but the flute gives you a freedom, and I actually am blessed. I got a flute for Christmas, my first flute, And my husband happened to take out the camera when I went to, I opened the box and I'm, oh, it's pretty. And I've got the picture of me, oh, looking at it, oh, this is pretty. And then I played my first note, and it's not at all the most attractive picture of me, I will say that. But it is so genuine because I've got big eyes, and I played this one note, like you got that first note in that attic,
Uh-huh.
and my face lit up, my eyes got even bigger, and he snapped the picture. And I have been in love with the flute ever since. Yes, frustrated and all those things you were saying about how you have to go and what questions to ask at different points. But I can't forget that moment when I made my first note. And it was a note. It was a note. And it sounded good. And I want more of it.
Right. And the flute so connects with your entire body. Um, this is something that you find out on classical flute, and people are always surprised when I show them this. But, you know, if you just hold up a classical flute and you tap on a key, it makes a note. And you think it's making the note that goes along with whatever fingering you just tapped on the key. But actually, that note is a half step too high, because part of the air column that goes from where's the camera here, that goes from the end of your flute all the way up to your mouth, that's not where the air column ends. The air column includes the air column inside of you. So a transverse flute, a classical flute, will not play the right note unless there is a human being attached to it, because part of the airstream inside your body is part of the air column that's coming out of the flute. And if you think of the flute that way, as it is literally an extension of your own breath, that's not just like a metaphor. The flute makes a different pitch when a human being is attached to it and their air column is attached to it than it would if you just tapped on it, or, you know, somehow caused air to go over the top of it that wasn't attached to anything else. But like just tapping on it is how you hear the difference. Um, yeah, it becomes part of your body, not just metaphorically. It's actually engaging with the air while it's still inside of you on its way out.
Well, you just answered a question for me too that I was formulating as I've been listening to all this. And I think a lot of us go in our head and we want it to sound like this. So we do this to it, we do that, we pull back on our breath, we put in a little more, we slow the finger down coming off. No, it's got to, and I'm not talking about a heart song, but you've got to have this all connected. So as you're breathing out and you want this sound, you craft it on its way out. You don't
Right,
just expect it to
right,
be there.
right. And it's you know, when you talk about getting too much in your head and trying to do things or telling your body like how to do certain things, at some point, playing the flute is a process where you have just connected a different thing to your um, mouth. Your brain has been working ever since you were born to formulate language and formulate sounds. Like you want to communicate something and your brain has learned to like speak your language, your native language, or it's learned to sing songs. And so when you put an instrument up there, if you are willing to trust the fact that your brain says, "Oh, my body has just grown a flute, so now I'm going to work on making the desirable sounds come out of this new appendage." Let your brain like work out the details, because it will start to interact with the flute the same way that your brain learn to interact with your vocal cords and your teeth and your tongue and your lips and your mouth and your throat. Your brain learned to work with all these things on your face to produce languages, produce words, to communicate things that people understood. And if you let the brain go through that process again and just say, I've stuck a thing on my mouth, um, and let the brain work on the coordination of the various parts of your body. If you let the brain work on that, the brain will start to treat your instrument in your hands the same way it treated your mouth and your tongue and your vocal cords and everything else when you're learning how to speak your language. It will start coordinating all these things on a level that's way deeper and faster and more complex than you can consciously think about when you're playing the flute.
Well, there's another gem, and from now on, I teach yoga, and I always tell people when they're standing and they're in their standing mountain that they've actually got 3 legs or a tail, whatever they want, because the tailbone goes all the way to the ground. Well, don't know why I didn't translate this. I did horses for 40 years as a professional, and I had them since I was a kid. And they were an extension of me because they were alive, and you're riding them, and you look over there, they look over there. I mean, it's just, it
Right.
becomes just like breathing. It becomes natural. But because the flute is an inanimate object, I never thought of connecting it, and I just grew a flute. It's part of me. It was something that I brought and I played, and what came out is part of me, but it's gone over there. That's another wonderful gem of it is you.
It's like a vocal prosthetic. You
Yes.
stick it up on your face, and your brain says, "Oh, this is how I make sounds now." So you can let your brain start working with this new thing attached to your face.
Well, I could use a new thing attached. Change. You want to go through changes as life. It's good. Joanne, this is the point of talking with people. I never would have made this connection. And there was somebody, Pam Mortensen, you know her in the digital room. Well, I was doing one of the Vashon online workshops, and she started talking about different timing. And so I've had trouble with timing. I can dance, but for me to make music, I can ride a horse and I've got that timing, but I'm getting that feedback. To have timing with this thing is now an appendage of mine. It actually, I'm growing this
Mhm.
flute. Um, I didn't realize the timing that is naturally me,
Mhm.
because of all those years with horses,
Mhm.
is a 3-beat gait, the canter, and just
Mhm.
do-do-do, 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 do-do-do. And if I listen to my music, I hear do-do-do, 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 do-do-do.
That's very insightful.
But
I
it took somebody else. You just did the same thing, and that's why having these conversations with people, knock open the doors, ask people to Zoom with you, come on Flute Talks, or have a cup of coffee with somebody online. This has been wonderful.
Same
And
here. We could go on like forever. We can't, but we could.
we have on, on when we weren't trying to do a show and keeping it to a certain point. I have really, really enjoyed this. And well, I'm waiting for us to get together. And boy, I wish I could take you horseback riding. So, that would be really fun, but time would be short. But at any rate, is there anything else you would like to say? Any other little tidbit or some little gem? I mean, that you've been so full of them. I wish we could keep going. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2.
We might have to do a part two. The one thing I can say for adults playing flute is be kind to yourself and be patient. Understand that all skills take time and music is a lifelong journey. You will never become a perfect flutist. There will always be things that you're learning there will always be things that you're refining or changing. So it's not like now I'm terrible, when am I going to be better? It's this is a journey about becoming more expressive, and it is a lifelong journey. It will never stop unless you
And
decide to pause.
And
Mhm.
I think if you ask, I have longevity in my family, as does my husband. And, I'm at the age where I've met people who have got longevity because some of them are my friends and they're just, and the one common denominator isn't what kind of food they ate, whether they went running every day or whatever, did yoga, smoked, it didn't matter. What it was they kept learning,
Mhm.
and I don't mean read a book, okay, I meant they kept the desire for learning, the passion for the learning. Didn't matter what the subject was, but if they saw something interesting, they'd go for it. That's why I think you're going to live forever, because when you find something, we've been talking about flute, but you're into other things. When you find something, you keep going. You keep, but you keep going with excitement, even when it's tough, even when it's frustrating, because you want to know how to do it, and you figure out a
Right,
way. And
right, right.
it's wonderful to watch,
Well,
and I
thank
hope
you.
to emulate.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I would like to say thank you very much, Joanne. We've wanted to do this, and I'm really thrilled. I would like to do another one. There are other things we are going to do, but I think there's so much more to discuss. Um, and for the rest of you, I thank you for watching Flute Topics, and I look forward to next time. And until then, happy fluting, everybody. So long.